Hey, what's up, everybody? Mike Shelby here. It's Tuesday, and it's 2 o'clock somewhere. So that means it's time for Tech Until Tuesday. Thanks for joining me here, by the way. Go ahead and drop your questions into the chat. Today, I want to talk about an area study. uh, this week, we'll talk about an area study. Maybe next week, we'll talk about intelligence networks. What's up, Dave? And then the third Tuesday after that, we'll talk about real time collection. I'm going to teach you some stuff from a presentation that I did, I don't know, many times, but the last one I did was a few months ago on crisis intelligence. And we're going to go ahead and go over that here in just a minute. If you have any questions about your area study, listen, the area study is really the most critical part of preparedness. I hear from all these people, they're going to bug out, and they got bug out bags, and they got bug out properties and cabins out in the woods. And they've spent all this money and they made all these plans, and they don't know what they're bugging out into because they haven't done an area study. They haven't looked at the physical terrain. And I'm not talking about just driving through an area, which is fantastic. You've got to go do your physical reconnaissance of the area. But they haven't studied the human terrain, and they haven't studied the critical infrastructure. They haven't studied the politics and governance of these areas. They haven't studied the safety, security, and defense. They haven't studied law enforcement and military presence in these areas. They haven't studied the economics and finance of these areas, financial conditions of the areas. So these are all things that I would look at before doing anything in an area, if at all possible. Certainly, you should be doing one for your neighborhood. And if you have a bug out place, you should definitely be doing an area study for your bug out as well. By the way, Tech Until Tuesdays is brought to you by the Area Intelligence Handbook. By the way, Trev says he bought the book. Fantastic. Thank you for writing it. Well, Trev, thank you for buying and reading it. Listen, these physical books, I literally have 4 left. They're all sold out on the website. But you know what? They're up on Amazon. And I'll make sure the link gets put in the description. Before we start here, just a quick question from Eddie. He said, I moved to a downtown area of a city. Are there any key differences in a study versus a suburb? Oh, yeah. There's lots of an urban area is far more complex than a suburban or a rural area. Because if you think about an urban area, not only are you dealing with much higher volume of people, but also much higher volume of structures and critical infrastructure. And you're dealing with a lot more probably complex political situation and government situation. And, if we just start, I have the 6 layers of my area study. And this is what I advise people do. But we just start with the physical terrain. And, we think about in a city, you probably have you may have subsurface features, whether those are sewer systems or subways or whatever else you have going, weird tunnels that people dig underneath the city for some reason. So just in the physical terrain, we've got subsurface, and then we got street level or surface. We got above street level, and then we got airspace. So those are 4 different layers of your physical terrain that you need to account for. And that's just much more complex in a city, especially with high-rise buildings and all the other things. Or are you just not going to make it in a city? Well, I think there's still time. It depends on what you do in that city. If you're making buku bucks in a city, I'd probably stay and keep making buku bucks unless I were able to leave. But certainly a city is not my first choice of where I would want to live. And that's just that's a personal preference that I have. That's why we moved out of downtown Austin. You look at all these things that happen in downtown urban areas, and it's just not somewhere where I want to live. I don't want to expose myself to the risk. And I worked in downtown Austin. So I don't want to expose myself to that risk. I definitely don't want to expose my family to that risk. And so, for me, it was just kind of a priorities. I really dislike Reid Hoffman, but he has a really good take on decision making. And he said, the traditional way we make decisions, or the way we're taught in a lot of places, you do your little SWOT analysis, you do your pros and cons, and you say, these are all the reasons why I should live here, and these are all the reasons why I should not live here. And he said, instead of making decisions based on pros and cons, he said, write out your priorities. What in your life has the priority, or what are your top priorities in life, and then determine your decision, or make your decision based off of which scenario most closely aligns with your priorities or the most important things in your life. So that's me. At any rate, so we looked at physical terrain, which is the first layer of our operational environment. Remember, in an urban area, you got subsurface, you got surface or street level, you got above street level, and then you got airspace. That's 4 different layers of your physical terrain. And then we move on to human terrain. Cities are far more complex in terms of the type of people who live there and the volume of people. And remember, demographics and all that stuff is not just about race or ethnicity or age. It is, those are this is like an iceberg. Okay, those are things that I can see. Those are characteristics of a person or a subgroup of people or an entire group of people that are observable. What that does not always do the best job of telling me, though, is what their culture is, or what their moral values are, or what they think about law enforcement, what they think about government, or what they think about other types of people, what they think about me. And so the skin color and visible outward characteristics, yes, it's easily identifiable, but that in many cases does not tell you probably what you need to know. And so we have that remaining 90% of this iceberg that's below the water. And those are the cultural values and the things that we can't see. And so whenever we're dealing with any type of operations in an urban area, you really have to understand the local populace. And sometimes we call this atmospherics. There's human terrain study. There's lots of different things that we can call this, or lots of different ways to study this. But, in terms of living in a city, the first thing I want to do is 2 things. Number one, find out what I'm up against, and then find out what I have to work with on the local level. And what I'm up against are the threats and hazards. And then what I have to work with are my resources and assets and allies that I might have in that community. And so this is just a much more complex operating environment than, say, a smaller suburb, especially due to the human terrain. So that's the second layer of an area I'm looking at, is who inhabits this area and what do they believe? How are they going to respond to anything that we were to do, for instance? The thing is critical infrastructure. What keeps your world spinning? Where do you get your water? Where do you get your power? What's critical to you, et cetera, et cetera. The next layer is politics and governance. So who makes the rules for you, or who's trying to make the rules for you? My logical conclusion to that is I want some level of power influence in who makes the rules. And if I don't have any influence over who's making the rules, then they're probably making the rules that are beneficial to them and probably adverse for me. And if they're adverse for me, then I really want to ask myself, what am I doing living in this place? And so that's another reason why I no longer live in downtown Austin, or any city for that matter, even though there are tons of economic benefits. If you're a young guy, you're starting your career, you're trying to work your way up the ladder somewhere in your corporate 9 to 5, if that's the life that you choose and you want to live, it's tough to do that in a podunk town. It's impossible. But if you want to be, and I just look at my own personal network, and being in Austin, surrounded by startups, surrounded by tech people, surrounded by founders, surrounded by finance, surrounded by all the things, all the benefits that are in a city. I definitely have had adverse economic consequences from not living in a city where I can be deeply connected to those kinds of networks. That is something that I have a sacrifice, I guess, if you want to call it that. That's a disadvantage that I have encountered by not living in downtown Austin or whatever city you choose to live in. So you just really have to weigh your benefits here, identify what your priorities are, and figure out if living in a city most closely aligns with your priorities. If you want to make it big in corporate America, or move your tech, you can't run a tech startup from podunk from South Georgia somewhere. You might can from Atlanta or Nashville, Atlanta, or Austin, Dallas, wherever. San Francisco, obviously. All right, so after the critical infrastructure, then we look at safety, security, and defense. Okay, and this is the 5th layer of our operating environment. So this is the police, the first responders, okay, all the safety and security elements. This would include private security elements as well. And then defense elements. So what is the military infrastructure around there? One concern that I have, and frankly, this is something that everyone should be doing in their area study. Identify the military infrastructure in your area. And we do that for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's because I'm looking for strategic targets. If we have a devastating cyber attack, if we do actually get into it with China or any threat actor, state or non-state or state-backed, then military infrastructure is going to be a target, obviously. So if I have intelligence or communications facilities in my backyard, if I live near anywhere where submarines are based out of, or important military assets that are strategically important, you are probably going to be at increased risk of disruption, whether that's via cyber attack, sabotage, terror attack, whatever. So that's something you should also consider, is what military infrastructure you have in your area, and then what risk does that pose to you. And then finally, the sixth layer of our operating environment is economics and finance. What are the economic drivers and the financial drivers of your area? Remember, when we do our area study, actually, let's just go ahead and jump into this right now. We'll do this. All right, so we do an area study for two reasons. Number one, to identify what we're up against. So what are the threats and hazards? What are the contingency scenarios we can face? The more we can do today to identify those and think our way and plan our way through those contingency scenarios, the better prepared we can be. I have people tell me all the time, preparing for a war with China or an EMP or a cyber attack or societal collapse or hyperinflation or zombie biker gangs, whatever the thing is you're preparing for. And something I think we covered last week is I guess it's not really a paradox. It's not really ironic. I don't know. It's misplaced focus, because the people who are focused on preparing for a war with China or a cyber attack or polar shift or whatever is going to end up happening, you're not really preparing for that event. You're preparing for the follow-on effects. So your job is to identify how those follow-on effects affect you on your doorstep, down your driveway, down your street, in and around your neighborhood, across your broader community, because those are the effects that are actually going to impact you directly. The rest of the stuff is going to indirectly impact you. And so that's another reason why we do an area study, right? We take these big picture strategic threats or scenarios. And am I concerned about hyperinflation anytime soon? No, I'm not. In 5 or 10 years, yeah, that does actually concern me a little bit, and longer. Am I concerned about, I just watched this morning, I went down this rabbit hole on the polar shift, the pole shifting. I don't know anything about that. But, several years ago, I did this deep dive into the global, like the Maunder minimum, and basically have these, long-term, like 400-year solar cycles or something like that. And actually, if you look at the science, we probably should be heading into a global minimum period, which historically is going to lead to, or I would say this, which has historically led to many ice ages. I don't know if we're going to have that or not, but the science is extremely clear. I went back and read a bunch of peer-reviewed articles and things that I thought were more likely to be accurate or like credible than not. At any rate, you're preparing for polar shift or a global ice age, whatever, that's fine. What are the local effects? How is that going to affect your neighborhood? Those are the things that we prepare for. So the first reason we do an area study is to identify what we're up against, the threats and hazards and contingency scenarios. And then number two, what do I have to work with? What are the resources and assets and opportunities do I have? Because an area study, and from my perspective as an intel guy, it's not just identifying what can go wrong, but identifying the assets, resources, and opportunities that I have to mitigate known risks and to gain some operational capacity to stop threats if we need to, or at least to navigate some of these contingencies. And we can do that much better when we have more people. As an intel guy, in the Army, we said every soldier is a sensor. And so every member of your tribe, every member of your network or your community or your neighborhood they're all sensors. They can see and hear things that I cannot at all times a day. So I would much rather have those people aligned with me. And it's even better if we can get our goals aligned. And now we can get our preparedness aligned and our cooperation aligned, especially on the intel side, seeing things and saying things or reporting that information up. So these are all considerations that I have when I'm looking at the second thing here, which is what do I have to work with? A lot of people miss that. A lot of people get hyper focused on my bug out bag and how many calories do I need and what's the twist rate on my barrel and how many Slurpee straws, whatever thing can I fit in my backpack. And yeah, all that stuff has a purpose, but intelligence is what drives operations. So for the people who think they're going to step off their porch and go operate, they're going to be very difficult. It's going to be very difficult for them to do that without intelligence. And that's another reason why we do an area study. So these are the two main reasons why we do an area study. By the way, if you have any more questions, please do drop them into the chat. Let's get back here. I love this story. This is something that I saw on the 10th anniversary of the Battle of Onijaf. So it happened in 2004. I watched this YouTube video from Travis Haley in 2014 on the 10-year anniversary. And he talked about not only the events, and he talked about all the people that were killed, but one of the biggest things that he said, actually, is this on the slide? Yeah. He said, this is what he had to say about the Battle of Onijaf. All right, so he's working at some coalitional provisional government in Iraq, in Onijaf. And I think it's Jaish al-Mahdi, the Shia fighters were like trying to take over the place. And so they got into this big gunfight. And he said, quote, one of the big things that bothered me was not knowing my surroundings, the indigenous people, the Mahdi army. That's the Jaish al-Mahdi. He said, we didn't study that stuff. It wasn't our job to do that. And I wish I would have. And he said we weren't S2 people. Like they're gun guys, right? They're there guarding the facility or guarding the political officials, U.S. diplomats, whoever. He said, we weren't S2 people. It wasn't our job to do that. But I wish I would have known all this stuff. And so this should say to everyone, you may be a gun guy, you may not be an intel guy, but really everyone has a responsibility to understand their surroundings, to gather information of intelligence value, and then help your S2 or your intel guy. Or if you don't have an S2, maybe you volunteer to be the S2. Because someone needs to put all these puzzle pieces together. And if your organization is not putting together the puzzle pieces, then you're not seeing the clear picture. And if you're not seeing a clear picture, it's kind of hard to operate in an environment like that. It's difficult to accomplish your mission if you don't know the environment in which you're trying to accomplish the mission. At any rate, Travis Haley goes on, he says, quote, I wish I would have understood who those people were, what their motivations were, and why I had to sit there as long as I did with a rifle and kill people. So that bothers me. So this is a gun guy, talking about a lack of intelligence or lack of information of intelligence value, not understanding what was going on. Could he have killed more people better if he had known what was going on? I don't know, probably not. Not in that situation, at least. On the targeting side, yes. But those guys just sitting on the roof and killing the people before they could shoot RPGs at them, that's a situation they were stuck in. But he says he wanted to know that stuff. He didn't understand. And that is a critical intelligence failure. So this is another reason why we do an area study. Not that we're going to Iraq again, hopefully not. But so that if there is an emergency in our own local area, in our neighborhood or in our city, civil unrest, some sort of localized collapse because of a natural disaster, a hurricane or earthquake, or a power outage, or maybe a man-made disaster. When all those things start to break down around us, we have to understand the environment we're operating in. And so if I have done my area study and I've identified those threats and hazards, if I've identified what I'm up against, I can work with my team or I can work with my neighbors and be much better prepared for that stuff. Alternatively, if I've identified what I have to work with at the local level, if I've identified the assets, resources, and opportunities, then I can work on developing those assets and I can work on marshaling all these resources, because I want somebody I want something to throw at someone else during this emergency. In other words, we do an area assessment. We stack up our threats, hazards, and vulnerabilities. We stack up our resources, assets, and opportunities. And I want my assets to be greater than my liabilities. Okay, I want the things that I have to work with to be bigger and better and greater than the things that are out to get me or that could get me. If my list of assets, if my capabilities are greater than my threats, I'm sitting in a pretty good situation. If my threats and hazards have greater capability than I do, or there are more of them than there are of me, then we've either got two options: increase our assets and resources, or prepare to deal with reality or the consequences of reality, the consequences of the situation. So this is another reason why I want to do my area study, and it is the main topic for today, Tech Intel Tuesday. By the way, I do this, or I've been doing this every Tuesday. I will continue to do this every Tuesday, probably around 2 p.m. Central Time, if you want to jump on and talk Tech Intel. By the way, put your questions or comments into the chat. For those of you just coming on, this Tech Intel Tuesday is brought to you by my book called The Area Intelligence Handbook, right there, Mike Shelby. It's a 200-page book. It's like a real handbook. It's not a little piddly, whatever, AI ebook. I wrote it back in 2023. I published the paperback version. We are all sold out, unfortunately, but the ebook is available on Amazon. So if you would like the handbook there, if you want a step-by-step guide, especially in the back, in the resources, I give like over 150 collection requirements. So 150 things that I look for in just doing an average area study, 150 considerations that you need to make when you're doing your own area assessment. All that stuff's in the book. I give everything away in the book. Just a quick story time too. Back in 2019, it was Ferguson, Missouri. Or, not Ferguson. It was Lumberton, North Carolina. It was Hurricane Florence. Sorry, I was thinking of we can talk about the Ferguson riots too. But it's 2019, Hurricane Florence, Lumberton, North Carolina. And we were working with the Cajun Navy at the time. And the Cajun Navy, great group of guys, great organizations. They go out, it's just a bunch of rednecks and Cajuns. They got monster trucks and john boats. They'll go into an area and pull people off the roofs and out of the attics and out of floodwaters. One of the things they did back in 2019 was they rescued something like 90 senior citizens from a nursing home. And this was not the federal government doing this. This is not FEMA. This is not the state police. This was not the county sheriff. It was just a bunch of volunteers who were willing to put their own lives at risk to go save others. And so that's just a highly commendable thing to do in an organization. But even them, even they run on intelligence. And when they don't have intelligence, their search and rescue operations are impacted. So one of the things we were doing, us volunteers, we were driving their intelligence. We were producing intelligence so that they could drive the mission. And they had this memorandum of understanding with the county sheriff. And the sheriff said, look, there's a volunteer fire department over here. It'd be a great staging area for you to go into. And so the director of the Cajun Navy called me up and said, hey, we got the MOU cleared. We're going to go, here's our address, here's where we're going to be staging. And I was going to start looking at that area to do an area study and start looking for, really what they were looking for is high population areas where there are probably going to be people who need to be rescued. They could already go ahead and stage for areas where there's a lot of people living there. Okay, so that's one of the things I was doing, just looking at population density and where people lived and what neighborhoods and what areas might need to be searched and rescued. So at any rate, the absolute first thing I did was I got on FEMA and I pulled down the floodplain maps for that area. And that fire station was in the middle of a 100-year floodplain or 100-year flood zone. The problem is this was expected to be like a 1,000-year flood. So I called Sean back and I was like, hey, dude, you can't go over there. It's the middle of a floodplain. You're going to wake up tomorrow morning and you're going to be waist deep in water. And sure enough, it was knee deep in water the next morning. So I started looking for different areas they could go to, and I found a Walmart parking lot that was in the general area, and it was the highest point of elevation for that area, and it was also outside of the 500-year floodplain. So I said, look, your best bet, go to this Walmart. Not only is there a Walmart there, there's a hotel, there's restaurants, there's pretty much everything that you would need for like the next few weeks of doing search and rescue and cleanup. So at any rate, this just goes to show that just a very basic physical terrain analysis of an area can be extremely important. I mean, we're talking about these guys waking up in the middle of the night because their gear was getting flooded, and now they got to pack all their stuff up in ankle, knee-deep water, throw it back in their trucks, and pull their boats and everything else they had and try to get out of there. And now they're driving around in floodwaters, and it's nighttime, and they also don't know where to go. So that's the situation. I'm not saying it would have been catastrophic for them, but it could have been much, much worse for them. And so this is why we always, before we have any kind of operations, guys, we've got to have intelligence. You've got to have area intelligence at the local level. That's why I wrote the freaking book called the Area Intelligence Handbook, because I talk about stuff like this. All right, with that, let's see what else we got over here. Yeah, okay, so for me, there's a huge focus on bug out bags and $10,000 worth of mountain house and all this other stuff that people can buy. For me, true preparedness, yeah, you've got to have that sustainment, okay? Because that's what food and water and rifles and ammo and all that's at least what food and water are, okay? Sustainment. It's going to sustain you into tomorrow. It will not win a conflict. It will not make you operational, essentially. So for me, true preparedness is first developing realistic expectations of the future. Intelligence reduces uncertainty about the future. That's why we do it, because we have a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen. And so if we can take a range of scenarios and start narrowing that down to what is most likely or what's more likely and what is less likely, then a commander or a decision maker knows what to prepare for. If I can go to the commander and say, well, this is the most likely course of action, or this is the most likely scenario we're going to be facing, then the commander can take his limited manpower, time, resources, assets, and I can take my own limited intelligence assets, ISR assets, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance platforms, and throw it towards the most likely scenario, or to plan and prioritize for the most likely scenario. So that's, for me, that's true preparedness. I would much rather have better or accurate expectations of the future and less material stuff. If I know what I'm getting into, if I know what I'm likely facing in the future, I can be much more efficient with how I prepare for it. Whereas if you don't know what you're preparing for, then you need anything and everything, because that's what you think you need. And you're probably wasting a lot of time and money doing that. And then the second point here is making sure that my stack of assets and resources is larger than my stack of threats and hazards. Let's talk about levels of intelligence real quick. By the way, if you would, I'm going to grab this link for everyone. If you'll just stand by for 2 seconds here. All right, I'll throw this link in the chat. Joink. If you'd like to get the Area Intelligence Handbook, there's the Amazon link. All right, let's talk about levels of intelligence, because this is also crucial to understand. Levels of intelligence, levels of operations, we're dealing with 3 levels, regardless of which side you're on, the 2-shop or the 3-shop, intel or ops. We start at the highest level, which is our strategic level, and that's going to be global or national in focus. Okay, so we're talking about long-term developments, long ways away. For instance, there's a lot of doubt about the viability of the dollar. How much longer is the dollar going to be around? Well, that is a strategic concern. That's something that's going to take a long time to come to fruition, or a long time to develop. That is a strategic concern, whereas a home invasion happening tonight at my house would be a tactical concern. It's happening much sooner, and it's happening at my local level, and it has a immediate direct effect on me. the long-term decline of the dollar does not have an immediate and direct effect on me. It has a greater impact over time, and that's what makes it a strategic threat, or that's what makes it not a tactical threat. So for us, the strategic level will be global or national in focus. If President Trump said, all right, we're going to ramp up DHS and we're going to hire 10,000 new DHS agents. Okay, just that alone, that's a strategic level development. Now I'll find out that 1,000 of those new DHS agents are going to Texas. Okay, that might be my regional or operational level. And then 50 of those are going to the greater Austin area. Well, now it's a tactical level development for me because it's happening happening at the local level for me. That's my tactical level. We can also think about this in terms of military engagements. Okay, everyone wants to win the war. Okay, the wars won at the strategic level. The strategic level is deciding what wars we fight and what wars are worth fighting and when do we fight them. So if you want to win the war, then that starts at the local level. So you've got to win tactical engagements. You've got to win the battles. And once you start winning a string of battles, that's called a campaign. And once you start stringing those campaigns along, okay, now we're winning the war. So if we're to put this in terms of our three operational and levels here, tactical, operational, and strategic, the local tactical level are the battles, the operational level are the campaigns, and then winning the war occurs at the national or like the theater strategic level. If that makes sense. By the way, if you have any questions, go ahead and drop them into the chat. I'd be happy to answer them. I think this is probably the last slide. This is just a presentation I did on crisis intelligence. We're just going to go through the stuff on area study. Next week, we can come back and talk about developing your intelligence network. Any questions or comments in the chat? All right, I can't wait for the other book you mentioned. I'm sure it's a mountain of work. Yeah, I'm writing a book on right-wing organizing. And it is. It's like every week I just realize how much deeper the topic is. But it'll be worth the wait. And I would love just to get like 2 or 3 months freed up. And that's the only thing I do. I just wake up, study, write the book, and get it out. Probably not going to happen that way. All right, guys, any other questions? If not, we'll hop off. I don't want to take up all your precious time here. All right, well, that's going to do it then. There's the Amazon link. Everyone, thanks so much for watching. If you watch this later, especially on YouTube, go ahead and drop a comment. If you have any questions, I will answer them on next week's TAC Intel Tuesday, which is coming up on Tuesday, whatever day that is in June at 2 p.m. Central Time or somewhere around there. All right, everyone, thanks so much. Thanks for watching. Appreciate the support. And until next time, be well and stay out front.